Welcome back. How can our local legislators help Connecticut's police officers to keep us safer? This morning, we're talking with State Representative Greg Howard about that. Representative Howard is the ranking member of the Public Safety Committee. He's also especially qualified to talk about this topic as he's a police detective in Stonington. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
So I want to talk to you about a lot of issues involving law enforcement, but I want to start with this Law Enforcement Training Advisory Board. It's a bill being considered, and it does some kind of interesting things. So tell us the idea. We talk a lot about, training for police officers, but this is something that you think is important to add in Connecticut that's happening elsewhere, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when I became a detective in 2015, I had an opportunity where I work is on the Rhode Island border. What Rhode Island has done for years is they train their police officers, their next coming up detectives, so to speak, at what they call the BCI school at the University of Rhode Island. It's every Friday. It's about 7 hours every Friday for 2 semesters, and you learn all aspects of crime scene processing, photography, fingerprints, latent DNA, tire tracks, all of the issues that you would deal with on scene. In Connecticut, we have a state-of-the-art lab in Meriden to process this evidence, forensic evidence, scientific evidence, but we've really failed in the last few years of training our police officers on scene to get that good evidence there. So what's happened in 2021, we had sort of a mass exodus of a lot of experience in our state, and that has resulted in a lower clearance rate of crimes in the state of Connecticut. So while that is a great class, and I remember going through it back in 2015 thinking, I wish we had this in Connecticut, because a lot of things are state specific, and we're paying money for people to go out of state, and we're sending that money out of state. So to create that situation here in Connecticut, and Central Connecticut State University is already in an MOU with the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection for a detective training certificate program, and this enhances that significantly to have the training from the scientists at the lab for the on-scene officers to get the best evidence to them so we can solve more crimes and prevent the wrongful incarceration of people because we have the right training people on the scene. Connecticut law enforcement historically has been the highest trained police officers in the country, and while I still think that's true, a lot of the in-service training that used to happen at POST, the Police Officers Standards and Training Council in Meriden, has sort of shifted a little bit more towards a certificate oversight, and that in-service training has dwindled a bit, so we're trying to rejuvenate that through our colleges and universities.
With a lot of this stuff, and I know there's other parts of the bill I want to talk about, but with a lot of this evidence collection kind of stuff, you get one shot.
That's correct.
So it can't be that, the first guy there didn't know what he was doing, because that's the kind of thing that an entire prosecution could be gone. So it's important to have that knowledge, right?
Right. It's important that you get that one shot at that piece of evidence and then one shot at the scene to recognize what evidence is there and what evidence is not there to really get to the best solution, for sure.
Now tell me about the other part of this bill, because we talked about the Central is going to have a certificate program for detectives and evidence collection. There's also a Southern Connecticut State University piece in this.
That's correct. So
tell me about that.
We've incorporated Southern Connecticut, where they've been working on the SWLE, Social Work for Law Enforcement. When the Police Accountability Bill passed in 2020, there was a lot of emphasis on marriage of social workers and policing, and there's been a lot of misinformation about that. The model basically works like this. For years, police officers, by nature of their 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week operation, get called to a lot of mental health issues when people are in crisis in those moments. But then they end up at the hospital, they get evaluated, and they're right back out, and there's no ongoing checking in, et cetera. Police officers and police departments have collaborated with social workers all around the state in this model where after that crisis moment, the social worker with a police officer continues to visit that individual to make sure they have the resources that are available to them, and they're really getting to the underlying cause, which makes that individual's life much better. It limits the amount of calls that police officers are going to, and it limits those interactions between police officers and folks with mental health that have some unfortunate and tragic ends sometimes. It's nobody's fault, it's the dynamic of it, but if we can avoid that, that's what we do. So I've partnered with one of my colleagues who has a completely different ideologue than me, State Rep Jillian Gilchrist, and we've worked together on this bill. I'm a police officer by trade, as you mentioned. Her background is in social work, and we've come together on these two bills, these two concepts into one bill, and we're working on getting it through the legislature now.
You're a Republican, she's a Democrat.
Correct.
Like you said, maybe your ideology on the world could not be more divergent, but on this you see eye to eye, and you said that's important.
That is important, and I like to point that out too, Eric, because it happens a lot in Hartford that we don't talk about. Almost probably 95% of the bills that we work on are unanimous, and the ones that are partisan or they fall on party lines, we really work hard on those together. So somebody like Jillian and I, there's a lot of things we don't agree on. We don't work on those things together. The things that we do agree on, like this, we work hard together on. And she's on the Appropriations Committee. This will be an expenditure in the budget, so she could work on that. I'm working on my end in the Public Safety Committee. She could work on it in Appropriations. And I'll say this, in the Judiciary Committee where I also serve, we spend a lot of money as a state on settlements for wrongful incarceration. If this particular piece of legislation and that training can avoid at least one of those, it pays for itself already.
And I just on that, the second piece, the social worker piece, it's not just people in mental health crisis, people training for autistic, dealing with autistic individuals, people with mental disabilities, as opposed to just mental health crises. So really broad and important part of police work. While I have you here, I want to ask you about some of the other big police bills. I know street takeovers is an important one. Yeah. That's something that's being worked on right now.
Yeah, so there's actually two bills. There's a bill in judiciary and there's a bill in public safety. A lot of our urban areas, Chief Jacobson from New Haven testified in one public hearing about this, that he had up to 40 street takeovers. Street takeovers are really dangerous. It's dangerous for the officers that are responding, it's dangerous for the people that are involved in it, and it's dangerous for onlookers too. So what we're doing is we're enhancing some of the penalties, including a 45-day suspension of anybody caught involved in a street takeover. We're enhancing the way that municipalities can seize and what they can do with street takeovers with ATVs and dirt bikes. And then we're also enhancing what we can do with vehicles. So if your vehicle is impounded because it was involved in a street takeover, until you pay the fees and the fines that are associated with your violation of law, then you won't get your vehicle back. So we're sort of enhancing those penalties as well. It's really to act as a deterrent. This is a degree of lawlessness that they just take over a city street and have no regard for the law. It's a public safety concern, and it really just doesn't send a good message that that's something that Connecticut does, and that too has bipartisan support to put a stop to this.
One more thing, we have less than a minute left, but there's been a lot of talk about the deadly crashes on the highways, and I know, we keep getting reports of people getting pulled over doing like 120 miles an hour and crazy things like that. What can the legislature do to try to help with all these highway deaths?
So the highway deaths is a complicated situation. When we saw that big spike starting in 2021, a lot of things were happening. We're coming out of the pandemic. We had a significant loss of law enforcement for a lot of reasons, sort of a stigma that was not just in this state but around the country. Again, 2020 we had sort of a pension cliff or a retirement cliff. We lost a lot of officers. We're still down officers at the state police and across many municipalities in the state, which has led to a big decrease in traffic stops. So where there's less enforcement, you can have less compliance, you can have more crashes. The average speeds are up. We've done a lot of things the last 3 years. We put speed cameras up. We put speed cameras on red lights. We put cameras on school buses. We put grants to targeted enforcement on certain areas. And I think we're really trying to do a education campaign to get people to slow down, but we're also working on the enforcement piece, and we're trying to get more police officers. We have recruitment bills, try to get more people to come into this profession. I've been a police officer for 23 years. I love going to work every day still, and I would encourage people to get into the profession. We could really use good people.
All right. Well, we appreciate you being here. We covered a lot of ground, but I think it's stuff that our viewers, every one of them, probably can be affected by all this stuff. So we appreciate you being here, Representative Greg Howard. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.